All right, let's start sharing my screen. Let's make sure I have it up. Everyone can see that, I'm sure. Today I'm going to be discussing something that should be interesting for everyone, meaning functional or are you dysfunctional? Let's talk about food and what we eat. So what is functional foods and how can we bridge the gap between what we're eating and how that can actually improve our well-being? We will be discussing that as well as some of the impacts of nutrition on health and wellness, also identifying very specific foods. I have a list that I consider my top 10 and how we can then implement these foods into our daily living, because nothing is as good. We can talk about things all we want, but until we actually see it into action, then it's just words. However, the best words that I can think of is by Hypocrisy. In BC 370, he was quoted as saying, "Let food be thy medicine." Boy, did he ever know what was happening. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, I hear you loud and clear, Molly.
Oh, okay, my earbud just went out. Sorry about that.
No
Yeah,
problem.
sorry. So he knew a lot more than what we give him credit for. And this was way before we ever knew what we were going to do to our food and how maybe we'd be obliterating it. So right now we already know that our obesity rates in America are trending astronomically upward. We have over 42% of obesity in America, with 19.2% of our children ages 5 to 18 also obese. With that staggering amount, we may not think much of it, but what you have to understand is that with the complications of obesity, we also have all of the disease states. Now, to understand that is to really understand what obesity does and what food that we put into our bodies, what kind of havoc does it play? Well, luckily, and I mean that sarcastically, we are known as a country of a diet called SAD. And I'm not talking about standard American diet, but rather standard American disease. Because what we end up putting into our mouths is food that is dysfunctional. In 2016, now remind you, this is 2016, Americans were getting 58% of all the calories in one day from ultra processed foods. So who cares? It's ultra processed. Maybe we don't care about that. But in reality, when I talked about function versus dysfunction, and we can think about that in many ways and many attributes of life in itself, dysfunctional foods are foods that are made up from real food, taking out the fat, taking out some of the starches, then adding in more sugar, hydrogenated oils, and then adding in things like artificial colors to make it that bright watermelon color, flavorings to really enhance how we're going to be tasting it, and then stabilizers in order to keep it on those shelves until who knows when it'll go bad. So why? Who cares, Molly? It's just food. What does it matter? Well, let's look at it. So with this dysfunctional food, or these ultra processed foods that line our grocery store shelves only to eventually come into our own pantry shelves, then be eaten by us, these change our gut, so from our belly to our brain, the signaling, how we crave things, how we continue to crave them. In addition, it increases this pathological eating behavior where we're continuously having a craving for something that is ultra sweet, ultra salty, or heightened in some way that will elicit the same feelings, the same gratitude, that same, oh my gosh, that was delicious, let me have more kind of feeling. Just taking it one step further, besides what is happening in the brain and the gut, these foods have, excuse me, are treated differently in our bodies. And when I say that, I mean they are stored differently. So instead of that food being treated like, maybe it has the macro of a carbohydrate in it, and we could use that as energy, but instead our body is going to be shoving it into fat and our fat stores before it will even see the light of day in our body as energy. In addition to that, so I'm talking about hormonal changes, but in addition to that, when that kind of thing happens, we start to accumulate more fat, the fat in our body. The fat in itself that we start to accumulate is pro-inflammatory, meaning it will increase the inflammation throughout our bodies. When we have more and more inflammation, we're damaging cells throughout the body. And I'm not talking just joints, I'm talking about cells in the brain, so our brain function. I'm talking about cells that line our arteries of our heart and our valves, and yes, our joints, and yes, in areas that we don't want it to become inflamed and damaged. And that leads into oxidative stress. Now, oxidative stress from these foods alone is very, very high, not to mention the oxidative stress that the fat, when it's accumulated in the body, can create. So eventually this damage that keeps happening and happening will end up creating disease. So if you can imagine, I could hit my skin and I could sit here and hit it and nothing would happen right now. But if I would continue to hit it for 7 years, eventually there would be a pretty good bruise there. And that bruise would be our normal way of our body reacting to something. It would normally inflame. It would normally create blood to circulate into that area because, I'm sitting here bothering it over and over and over again. The problem is when that happens inside the body, because we can imagine what it does on the outside, if we sat here and did this, but when it happens on the inside of the body, it's no different. This starts to get inflamed. This starts to have blood circulate to that area because our immune system reacts, which is great until it's not. Another way of thinking about this is if I scratched myself on my arm and then I decided, well, I don't really like that scab, so I'm going to dig at that. And then maybe a little bit of healing will happen. And then I'm going to dig at it again and dig at it some more. Now, we know it's going to get bigger. We know that that's going to continue to fester. We also know that it's going to start to look pretty darn ugly. So imagine a cell inside your body where you just keep digging at it and digging at it. And that finger poking and digging is the kind of food that you're putting inside the body. It's just digging and digging and digging, creating the havoc, creating eventually disease. So, is it dysfunctional? Absolutely. These ultra-processed foods are dysfunctional. So what can we do, Molly? You talked about all this functionality. So what we need to do is switch back, maybe just switch into something that is going to heal that wound that's on my arm, or heal that from, maybe put a Band-Aid on it so I can stop picking at it, right? We all had our children where they'll just keep picking and picking, and or a dog, and we put those big cones around the dog so they stop like hitting their head and scratching at things. It's no different. We need to put a Band-Aid on it. We need to let our bodies heal. And one way of doing that is using food that offers not only nutritional value, but offers health benefits. And that means food that can decrease inflammation and heal that gut, balance out these hormones, protect the brain, and then basically promote a healthier body inside and then out. So these foods have the ability to do that. It has an ability to optimize our bodies. I always like to think of food as the ability to put huge bear hugs around our cells. And these bear hugs, then, just nobody can touch them. Everybody's protected. Come in an array of things that we call phytochemicals, phytonutrients, adaptogens, things that are inside the food that you can't get when it's been taken apart and parceled out. You can't get it. But when we eat the food as a whole, then we're able to get these things, and we're able to put these bear hugs around each and every cell. So what does that mean? These big old words that everyone throws out, that blueberries, they're going to prevent, X, Y, and Z. Well, let's really think about this. Yes, that food helps this, but what you really want to think about is that it wraps that bear hug. It protects it. So things in our vegetables, things in our nuts and fruits, we can go through and I can name all of these antioxidants, and I'm going to go through a little bit of that, but not too much. And the same with our fish, and how our fish really, when we break it down, these are the things that are powerhouses. These are the things that are decreasing inflammation, helping to not have this oxidative stress constantly hitting against each and every cell, or that bang, 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 bang every time I'm hitting myself, or those 7 years, but rather really protecting. That's oxidative stress. That's the banging in or continuing to smack your arm against the wall. Those things really do neutralize or create a balancing mechanism to stop all the damage. So going back to this, we know that some of these things like lycopene and ascorbic acid, xanthrins, there's a lot of different ones that we're finding out are really big powerhouses in the play of how they affect our cells at the cellular level, making and creating a different way of the body reacting to things by doing a lot of this. And then the result is anti-cancer, neuro or brain protection, heart protection, decreasing that inflammation, improving our memory. Down over here, I have a list of probiotics, and these are things I'll be talking about, but truly from lowering your risk for depression in this day and age of seclusion and being cut off from the world for so long. We've been suffering a lot of anxiety and depression. And this is something that is true of most of us, or at least has affected someone you know. So, the US government has taken it and laid it out. Now, this is a little old, but it'll at least give you a feel for how powerful I'm talking these functionality of these foods can be, is that they have, excuse me, developed something called the Auric scale. And this scale is oxidative reactive absorbency capacity. And so they ranked all these foods based on how protective it can be, or how much of a bear hug is it going to put around all of our cells. And as you can see, blueberries aren't up there. Blueberries just simply have a really good marketing team, although they taste good as well. A lot of our spices and our herbs, things like curcumin or turmeric or cinnamon, those are the things, unfortunately, not as a big of a marketing team, but they are much, much stronger if we would rank them as powerhouses. So what are some of the things that we're looking at? We are looking at some of those things, herbs and spices, something that you guys we all have them in our houses. We may not use them anymore because some of that dysfunctional food has really dampened the way that we taste and that we can heighten. We want that really strong, like almost like pungent, oh my gosh, it's too salty because my eyes are watering or I'm piercing up. That's the only time we now are really recognizing how salty something can be or how strong it can be. It has to really hit the palate or that tongue to a much more heightened state, which is dysfunctional. Rather, in our cabinets, for most of us, we have the powerhouses sitting there, and those are our herbs and our spices. So turmeric, there's been so much research on turmeric in itself all alone and how that can be anti-inflammatory. I will be talking about this again. Things like this caspasian, which is actually in chili powder, in ginger, in cinnamon, in cloves. These things are all anti-carcinogenic or prevention from cancer. Or you can think about them as putting those big bear hugs around your cells. Garlic. Now, garlic has been up and down. You know, I heard this, I heard that. What you need to think about is not every study, and nor should it, ever come out as positively conclusive. Not every study, 100% of the thousands of studies are ever going to be 100% conclusive, because what they're studying these things on are humans. And humans, as we know, are all different. My hair is black. I'm sure somebody else on this webinar probably has blonde hair. Now, does that matter with respect to how garlic is going to react into my body? Maybe not. But at the cellular level, we now know that it will react differently. Some people react much better than others. So remember, just because you may have heard, oh, I don't know about that because one study came out inconclusive, take a moment, breathe, and really think about the benefits that we already know of some of this. Now, do I expect you to douse it? No, but here are 10 amazing foods that if you had to make changes today, these are the foods I would put into your diet on a weekly basis, a daily basis, trying to include it as much as you can to put those bear hugs around what you're eating. So what are they? I'll continue to go back to them, and I also have them listed out a little bit more succinctly, and each one will be talked about. But salmon, so let's go to salmon. What is salmon? We've heard about salmon being so great, and then we start to worry, oh my gosh, there's too much mercury, etc. Yeah, good reasons to understand and to be concerned about that. So the going amount of salmon per week is about 3.5 ounces. One time a week, it'll give us a gram of this omega-3s. Now, why? Why does that do it? What does it do? And can I just eat my chia seeds? Well, what is really coming out from this 2019 meta-analysis, which means they just took a whole bunch of studies, looked at them, and then spit back out the information to you, the general public. But what they concluded was that really the difference was in the marine derived or coming from fish. Now, it doesn't have to be salmon, but fish oil in the form of omega-3s is really what is showing to have the best result in lowering your risk for heart disease and heart disease deaths. It reduces your blood pressure. It's preventing the damage to those to the sides of the arteries so that we aren't constantly hitting it or scraping at it like we did our skin. Now, there's two things that we have to consider, which is different than plant-based omega-3s, as in chia seeds, is that omega-3 fatty acids coming from fish have a very large proportion of two things, EPA and DHA. And those are the two things that really matter when it comes to lowering your inflammation throughout the body. So let's say, Molly, I hate fish. I just can't do it, or I can't stand the smell, or whatever it is. There are ways to do this in a different form. And of course, everything you need to do is check with your doctor and make sure that the medication you're on can support something like this. But if you did go through a over-the-counter fish oil, you want to be looking at a proportion of the EPA to DHA ratio about 3-to-1. 2-to-1 is a good one. It depends on what your condition would be and what would be necessary for you in your certain condition. But that's what you want to look at. Please don't look at just omega-3 fatty acids, because you don't know where they're coming from. You don't know if the breakout is actually like this. So it's important to use your money wisely. Next food item that I have on my grandiose list is avocados. Not only are avocados so rich in potassium, which anyone out there that's listening, potassium is invaluable in the exchange of how our heart just beats. And so you're going to get into exercise as medicine. You want to consider, how is my heart beating? Am I getting enough of that push and pull in and out of my muscles? Well, potassium is really, really important for that. Lo and behold, it's also extremely beneficial in protecting our genes or our cells or the way our genes lay out from changing and being more susceptible to cancer. In addition, using avocado oil, organic avocado oil, is very high in that smoke point. So when you think about some of the vegetable oils that actually get really rancid because they turn into this by heat induced, meaning they get so high in the temperature that they become a whole different animal in itself, which actually promotes cancer. So using these oils wisely and using something like avocado is a great way of also reducing some of the external risks of using vegetable oils. Now, the next thing, and I know my time is running up pretty quickly, got about 5 minutes, but mushrooms. Believe it or not, mushrooms are really one of my favorite things of late. There is something in mushrooms called beta glucans. Now, these amazing things called beta glucans are very high in some of the wild mushrooms, but these beta glucans have been studied over and over again in how they reduce your risk of cancer, but most importantly, to inhibit that tumor that when you have cancer, from growing and expanding. That is one of or proliferation, which means just growing bigger. And that's a big, big deal. In 2020, they were using or studying how these beta glucans from mushrooms can actually help to strengthen your immune defense. And why wouldn't it if it's helping to retard or prevent tumor growth? So mushrooms, as simple as they are something that we could be adding in daily that have a big bang for their buck. Some of the other ones that are my favorites would be coconut oil. Now, am I saying that you need to do the American style of adding, 2 cups of coconut oil into everything you're eating? Absolutely not. But using coconut oil, taking out 1 serving of oil of something else, actually is going to be very beneficial for you. And what we're seeing is that because MCT or coconut oil has this medium chain triglyceride or fat in it, that actually helps to stimulate your metabolism into fat burning. It has an antimicrobial effect. It really helps to establish an even flow of energy as well. Moving on, we talked about bacteria or probiotics, and something that I want to very quickly address in the next 3 minutes is our gut bacteria. And I know I'm not going to have a ton of time, but what prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics do is that they are the protection between the gut lining. And I like to use the analogy that if I were a soldier and I had a princess behind me and I had to protect that princess, I need to be fed the right food in order to keep strong so that my shoulders will be butt up against the next soldier and no weapon or arrow or a gun will, or a bullet will be shot through. Now, if I don't feed my gut the way it should be fed, or my soldiers, what do? They start to shrink and they get weak and they shrink a little bit more. And when they start to shrink, you get these gaps between my soldiers' shoulders. And now that arrow can get through. Now the bullet can get through and it will kill my princess. So the thought that I'm trying to relay here is if I don't feed my soldiers, and those guys right here are the junctions or the probiotics or the big guys with stuff like that's what you would eat before, then they will not produce protection. And then we have these gaps. And that's when things can get through, like gluten, like microorganisms, like toxins. And those toxins and microorganisms and food products slip through and get into the bloodstream. And like I said, your immune system is an amazing thing until it's not. Because when it stops being amazing is when we develop a food intolerance to certain things, gluten, or anytime I eat something that doesn't sit well, my belly bloats up, which means it's inflamed, or systematic inflammation coming right in, right here, right through my soldiers because I couldn't protect them. So how do I protect them? It's really that postbiotic, what my soldier is going to do once I feed it, it's going to grow bigger, right? So now really no gaps. And so that's my post. That's the end result. And it's simple enough to add in some resistant starch. And those are things like, let's see what time. Okay, I'm going to have to wrap this up. But those are things that you may have heard about. When I was in grad school, we knew that if you cooled down rice, stuck it in the refrigerator, and then you reheated it with some water, it would decrease in the calories. If it was 100 calories, it would actually go down to about 70-ish calories that were usable. We had no idea a long time ago that these things were postbiotics, that our gut bacteria is just creating stronger, powerful things. And so these are some hints that I have in the slides that you can definitely look up later on. Things like overnight oats, great resistant starch, great postbiotics. Just a couple other I'm going to hit on quickly and then we can move on is green. It's called the green chemo prevention, and those are broccoli sprouts. They have something called sulforaphanes, which are unbelievably healthy in the prevention and protection of cancer. The next thing that I had already mentioned was some of the herbs that we're talking about, like curcumin. One thing I want to just point out is that black pepper, along with the curcumin, if you are using it, please add it in. Matcha, not matcha, okay? That's a green tea. Drinking that throughout the evening. Now, everyone's favorite would be cacao. And I'm not talking about milk chocolate cocoa. I'm talking about the deep, rich stuff, which offers not only fiber, but it gives you really good amount of protein, and you're getting all of the benefits that I talked about before. So the last one would be all of our cabbage, onions, garlics, etc. So how do I wrap this up? Ooh, Alan's thinking, thank goodness, right? Well, if I had to say anything, here it is. Using functional foods versus this dysfunctional food. It's really about getting rid of those simple sugars and getting the processed junk off your shelves. Next, cleaning up your gut bacteria to strengthen your soldiers. Next, saturate the body with these antioxidants, these phytochemicals, these big bear hugs around all of your cells. And that means plants. And replenish, obviously, with water and electrolytes. So once again, these would be the top contenders in my list. If you want to put it into practice, I have both a up to lunch, as you can see, it doesn't take a lot of work, into the evening. Any questions? I have 2 chats in there. Alan, do you want me to grab them or no?
Yeah, feel free to. Thanks so much, Molly. Super informational as always. And I just wanted to point out, if anybody does have to hop off, the webinar is being recorded and available in the future. And then if you have any questions that you don't get to Molly during the chat, you can also send to me and I'll make sure that Molly gets them.
Those were the questions, actually. So I think we're good. The questions were about, if we could get a link to the presentation, a copy of what my presentation is. Absolutely. There are no more questions. So I really appreciate everyone for attending. Once again, my name is Molly Linek, and I hope this was informational. So function well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Molly. And again, if anyone has follow-up questions that they would like for me to get to Molly, let me know, and I will get those answers for you. And I will definitely make sure that everyone gets a link to this recorded webinar, so that way they can go through these slides and get the information that they might need. Okay. Thanks,
Good
everyone.
night.
Hope to see you next month. Bye-bye. All right, Molly. Great. That was awesome. I'm not recording anymore, so we're good to go.
Oh, okay, good.
I think I hit stop recording. Yeah. Well, now we are.
Okay, good.